Rick Miracle with video number 24 of 25. Masonry and Satanism. Dugeon, Fire, and Sword by John Robinson. My point of this book review is to show you that from 1000 AD to 1300 AD, 700 years ago, to 1000 years ago, there was 8 crusades. We're in the same place we're having all the trouble now in the Middle East, Syria, Jerusalem. There were 8 crusades, and the murder and mayhem just went on and on for 300 years. A lot of people just don't know the reality of what went on. Saturday, November 16th. Video number 24 of 25. I thought I'd share an interesting story with you, a book I read entirely this July and August while I was in Maine this year. Dugeon, Fire, and Sword by John Robinson, the Knights Templar, and the Crusades. My point to doing these videos is that we are in these times in 2013 where there just seems to be a lot of chaos going on, a lot of posturing, a lot of talk about a new world order, all the overthrows of the country in the Middle East, and a lot of people are in denial. They believe the propaganda in the media. They think everything is a consequence of some actions. And in my opinion, it's all pre-planned. So anyways, back from 1000 to 1300 AD, 1,000 years ago to 700 years ago, 300 years, they had 8 crusades. From the Vatican, from England, from Germany, from Italy, from Spain, all of the European area, 8 crusades in 300 years, and each time the crusade, a wave of Europeans went there and massacred everybody, men, women, and children, horribly, gutting them, spilling their guts because they would hide coins, gold coins, by swallowing them when they saw the enemy coming. So the enemy wouldn't take their gold coins. So they had to kill the children and the women and everybody and gut them and spill their guts on the ground to get the coin. Very horrific. And that's the point of my review of this book. For 300 years, it was horrific. And the Knights Templar and the Pope and the Vatican and the kings and the people of power of all over Europe had a strong hand in all of this. And the citizens, the normal, average, everyday citizen, perpetually, on both sides, all sides, were always the victims. Whenever there was a wave of crusaders, the Arabs would be wiped out. Then, after being subdued for 10, 20, 30 years, a leader would rise up in the Arab world, and then they would throw out all of the Christian pilgrims. The elites would hop on boats and ships and make their way safely back home to their castles. But the pilgrims were all slaughtered. And then 20, 30 years later, it was a big money-making business also. And a lot of promises of land and estates and castles and kingdoms. So then it would be another crusade, and they would kill all of the castles and all of the towns. They would slaughter all of the Arabs. A lot of intrigue, a lot of horrible stuff going on. So this book details it for 300 years. And I read this book in its entirety. See all my little stickers there? This July. And what really struck me was just the viciousness of that humans can do. So I'll just get on with this and read it and get this over with. And hopefully by the end of this particular video, you'll see what's been happening this 300 years now, with all the battles going on in Syria, and Cyprus taking the money, and the Balkans, and Libya, and Jerusalem, and Israel, and Palestine, and Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Africa. It's just another repeat. The people running the show are just, well, you'll see. Holy War, 1052 to 1099. So the book is divided into different time periods. On a Sabbath day in the middle of the 11th century, the patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church was celebrating a solemn mass in the great Basilica of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople as three booted men entered the church and stomped down the center to the high altar. The leader slammed the document down on the altar, at which, without saying a word, then turned and marched out. The three men were cardinals, princes of the Church of Rome. The document was a decree of the Roman Pope Leo IX, which declared the excommunication of the Emperor of the Byzantine and all patriarchs, priests, monks of the Orthodox Church, as well as all the citizens of the Eastern Roman Empire. That would be, the part of Russia, the western side of Russia, and Greek, and all those countries, the Balkans, the Black Sea, Caspians. The choice was eternal damnation or submission to the overship of the Church of Rome. The beef is the Christian church said that God was talking and acting through the Pope, and the Byzantines, the other half of the Christian church, believed you didn't need a Pope or anybody to talk to God and pray. That was the big battle. And this battle goes on till today. Of course, we had the Protestants, we had the Baptists, and you had all the Lutherans, and all the different sects. So there's been this battle in the church. And Catholic, by the way, means universal. And of course, they had the church established in Rome, where they used to have Caesars. So it's not hard to see that this is tainted a little bit. Let me just move on. The Pope demanded that the whole world recognize his exclusive right to men's minds as the Viceroy of St. Peter and of Jesus Christ himself. So Mr. Pope wanted to be Jesus Christ. And I'm just skipping through page 8. I just highlighted certain things, and I'm going to try to skip through this book so we're not here for an hour. The emperor needed help. Although the Byzantine Empire was still wealthy, it did not have the population base to supply the troops required to protect the Balkans. So my point is, when I name these cities, you're going to find out these are the same cities having the battles right now. Okay. For Urban II, that was the Pope, however, the opportunity was just too great to be dismissed. As the plan formed in his mind, the plight of the Eastern Empire seemed almost like a gift from God. On one plan lay so many benefits. He envisioned a holy war, a war in the service of God. The Christians would take possession of the Holy Land, which had been wrenched from the Byzantine by the fanatical followers of Muhammad. So on one hand, you have the Roman, England, France, the Catholic Church, Germany, Austria. And then towards the north and towards the east, you had the other half of the Christian church, the Byzantines, which was Turkey and Greece and the Balkans and this side of Russia and Poland. See, and they were, so it was two big Christian churches, the Byzantines and the Catholics. The Catholics had the Pope, the Byzantines, all the countries had an emperor. So that was a battle within the Catholic Church. And apparently the Holy Land was, of course, off to the east. And he envisioned a holy war, a war in the service of God. The Christians would take possession of the Holy Land, which had been wrenched from the Byzantines by the fanatical followers of Muhammad. So off towards the west were the Arabs, Syria, Libya. So you have all the Arab territory. Then to the northeast you have the Byzantines, and then the south and Italy and all that you had the Catholics. Three big, large groups of people. And of course, on the south would have been China and India. So 4 groups of people. And off to the west, Mongolia. Anyways. Wrenched by the fanatical followers of Muhammad, and restored to Christian control, or better still, Roman control. A common goal was that put European Christians all on the same side, would curtail their never-ending fights among themselves. Land would be available, here's the catch, land would be available for younger sons of the nobility. For now that laws of promulgation were taking hold, all but the eldest sons were landless and turning into adventurers and near bandits. So as the nobility's families were growing, the younger sons, there was nothing for them to inherit. So they were turning into pretty much adventurers or bandits to try to acquire riches. These are the nobility. Like the same problem we have today with the elites and the banksters, controlled by the Illuminati, which are using the Zionists and the Israel affair and the Masonic lodges across the country, and propagandizing the people of the USA and the world, taking over all of South America and killing all the presidents that get in the way. There's a lot of secret stuff going on. But as we're seeing here for 300 years, this is nothing new. A common goal that put European Christians all on the same side would curtail their never-ending fights among themselves. Land would be available for the youngest sons of the nobility. For now that laws of promulgation were taking hold, all but the eldest sons were landless, turning into adventurers and near bandits. I got to get better at my reading. The church would have to play the lead role because men of many nations would be involved. As a result, all would recognize the leadership and primacy of the Holy Mother Church, and surely the rescue of the holy places as well as the protection of the Eastern Empire and of the Eastern Church. Moving down. A crowd that assembled for the great events was so large that a cathedral could not hold them. The Pope was going to give a big speech. There was no underlying anger against the Muslims at that time. So the Muslims are sitting over there in Palestine, in India, in Egypt, Africa, and there's no underlying warring or anger with them at that time. Christians in the Holy Land were permitted to practice their religion. There was no barrier to pilgrims visiting the holy places. They had to pay a toll to enter Jerusalem, but they also had to pay a toll to get to the gates of London and Paris. I guess that's what big cities did back then. You had to pay a toll to get in. Moving on. With such religious tolerance on the part of the Muslim rulers of Jerusalem, and with access to the holy places for Christian pilgrims, it was going to take some skillful effort on the part of the Pope to stir up the people of Europe to the point where they would leave their homes to risk their lives in a foreign land. Ha. Fooling people in the USA now to go fight overseas, and all kinds of problems with that. We borrow the money. The Illuminati and Prime Minister Sharon of Israel said it. They control the USA. Look it up. And so they're controlling our country and our politicians. Everybody knows that by now. And so we're borrowing money from their bank to fight their war, which we owe them, which is going to enslave us. Because they're going to say, we want all your money, you owe us all this money. Urban, too, was up to the task, and as he arose to address the crowd, he employed all the propaganda techniques the job required. He inspired hatred for the Muslims by allegations of horrible physical atrocities worked upon helpless Christians. He appealed to his listeners' quest for glory by comparing the proposed conflict with the victories of Charlemagne over the pagans. He held out the promise of land, catering to the frustration of the non-inheriting younger sons of nobility. Wrest that land from the wicked race, subject it to yourselves, the land which the Scripture says floweth with milk and honey. He held out the ultimate reward, an eternity in paradise, by declaring all that who died in the Holy Crusade would receive instant absolution and the total remission of sins. Wow. As Urban completed his inflammatory oration, there were cries, "Douze la volte," God wills it. The entire audience took up the chant, and it became a battle cry of the First Crusade. Ahima Montreal, Bishop of Le Pry, was the first to kneel before the papal throne to plead for permission with the to go with the host to the Holy Land. What do you think of that? Okay, now moving on to page 42. I'm just going to jump through this book and give you the gist of it. Within 10 years, Pope Innocent II, this is another quote, would issue the bull Omnium Dictum Optimum, bestowing it every great gift on the temple order. It exempted the Templars, this is the Knights Templars, this is where they created the Knights Templars, from all authority on earth, secular and temporal, except that of the Pope himself. Christ's vicar on earth. Now the Templars could collect tithes, money, but didn't have to pay them. So they could charge people money and they didn't have to pay anything to the Pope or anything. No monarch, to be a king or anybody else, could impose his civil law on the Templars. No bishop, archbishop, no cardinal could even give them orders or interfere with their activities. They could even rid of any priest who didn't suit them. So they got a priest and they didn't like him, he had to leave. Templar treasure house was constantly the most secure depository available. So they got into the money business. And again, I'm just jumping through this, giving you a tidbit here and a tidbit there. You get the point of the story, I think. Page 55. Abba Melech built a great mosque on the site of the Temple of Solomon. And again, this series is Masonry and Satanism, and I'm just trying to tie in the Masons with the Illuminati, with Israel, with the Zionists, with all this stuff going on. There's a huge plan taking place. And this is all naming all the same things and places. In the news lately, they're talking, it was a press release a couple weeks ago, they said, demanded it's time to build the temple. It's time to build King Solomon's temple. King Solomon was the guy with the king with the magic ring that could call forth demons. All this is satanic. There's an occult nature to all this. The location of the temple of the prophets in the night journey of Muhammad. So when Muhammad left his body and went on a journey with the ghost, one of the places they went was to the temple in Jerusalem, so they built a mosque at that site. He gave it the name that it had been given in the Quran, the furthest mosque. That's the name of it, the farthest mosque. Or in Arabic, Aqsa. This was the Aqsa Mosque that King Baldwin II assigned to the newly formed Knights Templar as the site from which they took their name. So this was going to be their office. The Caliphate also built a beautiful dome mosque at the center of the mount. The Dome of the Rock. This is what they want to tear down now, that's under a big dispute over in Israel right now. Why Israel is trying to create all this chaos, not trying, doing. So they can slowly evict or kill or whatever all the Palestinians, so they can go ahead and rebuild the Temple of Jerusalem, which is all in prophecy in the Bible. A lot of people know the stories. Both buildings still stand as houses of Islamic worship on the Temple Mount of Jerusalem. So it's a big problem, right, for these people in the church. Okay. There was no enthusiasm for a crusade among the German barons, who felt that they had their own crusade at home. And I'm jumping ahead to the next 50 years. Who felt that they had their own crusade at home. For generations they had been fighting incessant wars against the pagan tribes on the eastern borders. So east of Germany would be this side of Russia, and all those countries, Greek. Look at a map, you'll see them all, Poland, Iran. They didn't need to travel over 1,000 miles to prove their love for Christ on foreign soil. Weren't they already forcibly converting the heathen they subdued and killing those who refused to accept Christ? Page 93. Count Raymond and 2 companions escorted the royal sisters for a short distance on their journey to the holy city. As the Count and his men turned back and passed through the great south gate into Tripoli, in the news, isn't that in Libya? They were set upon by a band of knife-wielding assassins. They had a lot of assassins in the mountains back then, Arabs. Not all Arabs, but just a certain sect were assassins. Who pulled them from their horses and stabbed them all to death. In response to the cries, the castle garrison rushed outside to learn that their count had been murdered. They ran through the streets, killing every Muslim they met. But none of these killed belonged to the group of successful assassins who seem to have just faded away. In this book that I read over and over and over, the vicious murdering on all sides. Look at the Catholic Church in Rome, in Italy, in Germany, in England, in France, in Spain, fighting the Catholic Christian Church, fighting the Byzantine Christian Church up to the north in Turkey and Black Sea and all that area. So those two were fighting. Then over there in the Arab land, you have assassins, you have regular Arabs living in homes. The Arabs were friendly and letting the pilgrims come see Jerusalem, where Christ was born. A lot of intrigue and drama that went on for 300 years. So I'm just trying to... The coming of Saladin, 1163-1174. Careful plans were made to control reactions to the proposed murder. When they were ready, Nisar invited the Caliphate to his house for a midnight homosexual orgy. So you had different kinds of things going on here. The Caliphate dressed and perfumed himself for a night of erotic adventure. But as soon as he had arrived and relaxed, Nisar stabbed him to death. So there was always the battle with the Arabs over the Shiites and the Sunnis. And I thought I would use that little paragraph there to maybe see if I could put an explanation on it. When Muhammad died, his nephew or cousin said, "I am the next blood relative, I am the next leader." That's the Shiites. The whole church as a whole, Muhammad's religion, Islam now, they said, no, we'll choose a new leader. That's the Sunnis. So that's the whole thing. The Shiites wanted all the control to be family down the line, and the Sunnis wanted to elect a new person that they deemed worship to rule the religion, like we have the Pope who gets elected. So what the Catholic Church did in many of these cases when it was invading the Arab land, it would pit these two sides against each other, knowing the problem. So it would say to the Shiites, for example, you help us kill all these Arabs in this Sunni area, and then you'll control all the Muslim religion. So the Shiites would help the Catholics. And then sometimes if it was beneficial, when they had control of Israel and Syria and there, Egypt, if they had problems with the Shiites, they would get with the local Sunnis and said, you side with us to kill the Shiites and we'll let you control the area. So just like the divide and conquer here in the USA, they're apparently trying to do between the rich and the poor, and the immigration with people from the South, Mexico, South America, and the people, the jobs, and then the black and the white issue. These evil people, the Illuminati, they're intentional. They use these divide and conquers, the divisions, they create them. The great northern castle of Terrassa had been given into the care of the Knights Templar. Now the Hospitallers were another group like the Knights Templar, but they had white uniforms instead of the black uniforms. You might look that up, Hospitallers, and images on YouTube and see the Hospitallers Knights and then the Knights Templar Knights. It's kind of fascinating to see the different dress they have. So then when you see pictures of both of them together, you'll go, aha, that guy's a Hospitaller and that guy's a Knights Templar. Just stuff you get when you start reading them. Now the Hospitallers were given the castle of Beauvier by the fords of the Jordan. So the Knights Templar were given one castle, and the Hospitallers were giving another castle. The military orders were occupying more and more of the Crusaders' fortresses, becoming in the process two of the greatest landholders in the Holy Land. So these two knights groups, the Templars and the Hospitallers, were winding up being two of the greatest landowners in the Holy Land. What the Templars and the Hospitallers provided in exchange for protection was protection for everyone's property, for the people, for the nobles, for the king, with the self-serving greed of the feudal system in full swing. The feudal system is what we call, they're trying to bring about now in the United States, communism and socialism, the divide between the wealthy and the poor, the have and the have-nots. and with the new microchipping and all the spy camera systems they're doing in the U.S., I'm just bringing all this into today's focus of reality. They want to bring back this whole system to rule people. They're going to step back in time and enslave everybody or kill who they don't need. There's an insanity going on in the minds of these people that are ruling our world. Don't you think? With the feudal system in full swing, they had the only disciplined armies across the entire sweep of the Holy Land. King Alarmak thought that the military orders, in exchange for the great properties he had given them, would give him complete support for his own military ambitions. In the case of the Knights Templar, he was wrong. So these people had their own ambitions, all these kings, all the stuff the Pope had promised, do the Crusades, and the Pope was reaping in tons of money. Remember, the church was getting 10% of everything. So the Pope was motivated to do these 8 Crusades over 300 years, whoever the Pope was at the time. Whenever they had run short of funds, they would have to trump up a new crusade. And then once they invaded and killed all the Arabs in those cities, and they didn't leave one alive. They needed all the houses and everything for the pilgrim Christians. And then when an Arab leader would rise, they would wipe out all the Christian people, wouldn't leave one alive. And the horrific torture and beheadings, and a lot of times they would, instead of killing everybody because it'd be a mess to clean up, they just cut off their noses and sent them packing in the desert with no money and food. So they knew they would die out there. So they had to have their own 2 legs to walk on until they died. And so they just cut off everybody's noses and crazy things like that. What happened when the gates of Babylus were opened to the Christian army was a repeat of the bloody massacre at Jerusalem during the First Crusade. The butchery began as soon as the invaders were inside. Victorious Latins, that'd be from Spain and the other Latin areas, charged through the streets, hacking away at men, women, and little children. Many of the citizens were Coptic Christians. So these are Christians that had moved into the area. But their religion didn't save their lives. They were dressed like Muslims. They were living in the area. So they died like Muslims. Houses and shops were broken into, and soon the crusading army was a raving, rioting mob completely out of control. It took days for Alamech to restore order of any kind. And again, why I felt it important to read you a little bit more from this book than I do others. If they do pull off this revolution in the USA, we're going to have raving, lunatic mobs of people rioting through the streets. And it's all going to be planned, and they're going to be sitting back laughing while everybody's killing each other. The fall of Jerusalem, 1187. As he looked out over the bodies of fallen Christians on the slopes of the Horns of Hattin, while his men carried the headless bodies of military monks away from his camp, Saladin, this was one of those Arab leaders that had risen up, could not envision any obstacle to his total conquest of the Holy Land. So this is almost 200 years into the Crusades. I'm not quite sure which crusade this was. Most of the leading Christian nobles were his prisoners, including the king. And if you were a noble and you were a prisoner, you really didn't have to worry, because they would just ransom you. But if you were not a noble, a soldier or a worker or a child, you were slain or enslaved. Even if they had been free, they could do little to stop him, since he had just destroyed their army. The fanatical military orders were shattered as well. With the Hospitallers master dead in the field, and the Grand Master of the Knights Templar in captivity, the rest should come easily. It certainly appeared so, as the Countess of Tripoli surrendered Tiberius to him the very next day, July 5th, 1187. Just trying to give you a little quick history lesson here. 300 years of blood and mayhem, and the battles between the Catholic Church and the Byzantine Christian Church to the north, and the battle between the Shiites and the Sunnis, and then the elites from the West, which would be England and France and Germany, and all their nobles needing opportunities, business opportunities, I suppose you could say. And the Pope needing money, they would authorize the Crusades, and another 8 of them in 300 years. Get the book online, probably cheap. I use book site or buy it new. Now they can make up for those past sins by taking up the cross to go on crusade. A total remission of sin and eternal bliss of God's heaven would be the reward for every crusader. You know, so on the media and all that, they mock the Arabs, saying if they die, bombing somebody, they're going to get virgins and all that stuff. It's all propaganda. Look what these people were promised by the Pope. Is there any difference? It's all propaganda. It's to control the minds of the people. I'm doing these videos so maybe people will wake up. As the Christians began to run out of food, they ate all of their horses. Then they consumed, page 162 by the way, all the birds, dogs, cats in the city. Some of them pushed their women and children out of the gates to avoid having to feed them, not caring that the Arabs in the mountains would gather them up for sale into slavery. Some of the captive women told stories of cannibalism in the castle. So see, what I'm trying to say is, do you see what happens when this kind of insanity, what if they have a nuclear explosion in Charleston Harbor, like one person said recently on the news, and they had martial law in the USA and they quit delivering food. This is how people behave. It's enough to make me emotional. Sorry about that. But I'm thinking maybe if other people get a little emotional and we all pay attention to what the culprits, the bad people, the Illuminati, Masonic, high-up 33-degree masters and Zionists and banksters and globalists and elitists, and we don't know if they're half reptilian people with an alternate DNA are trying to have cause worldwide. If we wake up, maybe it won't happen. A few emirs with ransom potential and a handful of muscular men slated for hard slave labor have been left behind. But most of the Muslim prisoners were here confused and frightened. As the Muslims nearby watched in disbelief, this is King Richard I'm going to talk about next. Richard's men began to carry out his orders to attack them all. Swords, spears, knives, and axes all flashed in the sun as they rose and fell. So they were massacring all the people. This time the children were not saved for the slave markets. They were butchered with their fathers and mothers. Even babies in their mothers' arms felt the knives of the blood-drenched Christians. Horrified, the watching Muslims gave way to anguish, rage, and raced for the hill. But in their scattered ranks they could not penetrate the thicket of the English spears and the storm of the crossbow belts that met them. Moving on page 183. Fortunately for his memory and legend, Richard was called Coeur de Lion, the Lion Heart, which we all see in the movies and TV shows. History gets written by the victors, and in our case, history is done by the mind controllers who took over Hollywood in the United States in 1913 when they created the Federal Reserve. But history might not as well have been remembered him as the butcher of Ayada for what he just did at Yad. Nor were the prisoners and their families the only deaths he was responsible for that day. As news of the slaughter... Sorry about that. My computer stops once in a while with some kind of an alert. Alright. Nor were the prisoners and their families the only deaths he was responsible for that day. As news as the slaughter spread throughout Saladin's empire, that was the Arab leader, Christian prisoners everywhere were tortured and murdered in reprisal for the infamy. But now, with the annoyance and expense of the Muslim prisoners out of the way, Richard felt free to march on Jerusalem. So he killed them all because they were an annoyance and interfering with his activities. Page 289. I'm skipping right through this. I'm almost done. On June 1244, the Khorassanian hordes, these are from the Mongolia area, east of this area towards the eastern end of Russia, you know, where Japan is, and Japan, and Mongolia, and China. The Khorassanian horde burst into Syria as a fast and frenzy of killing, looting, and burning. They destroyed farms, villages, and sizable towns. They swept around Damascus and poured into Galilee. So what I'm trying to say is these are the same old cities that are in the news today with all the problems going on today and all the murder and mayhem going on today. Hope I'm making my point. They took the capital at Tiberias, and in a great rampage raped and murdered, and then they moved south in the direction of the holy city. The Grand Master of the Knights Templar, with the Hospitallers, Grand Master, and the Patriarch of Jerusalem, hurried to the city with additional men and supplies. Skipping on. I just went through here and just had some of these paragraphs. Here we go. Matthew Paris provided a clear indication that the European Christians were untroubled by stories of Mongol terrors. So now we had the Genghis Khan age, where the Mongols off towards, like I said, the east from Jerusalem were rising up. So now we not only have the Christians, Catholics, and the Byzantine Catholics around Turkey and all the north there, and the Sunnis and the Shiites. You got a fifth party, the Mongols, with Genghis Khan. And he comes through there and he's wiping out everybody. Stories of Mongol terrors. He recorded that when Henry II of England expressed to the Bishop of Winchester his concerns about the assassin envoys, reports the good bishop replied with ecclesiastical arrogance, "Let these dogs destroy one another and be utterly exterminated. And then we shall see the universal Catholic Church founded on their ruins, and there will be one fold and one shepherd." Is that what they're doing now? Do they want us to destroy each other in 2013 so that they can have a... Listen to what he said. Let these dogs destroy one another and be utterly exterminated, and then we shall see the universal Catholic Church founded on their ruins, and there will be one fold and one shepherd. Again, I ask, is what is being planned now? Are we all so stupid that we are going to fall for this? That arrogance was lowered a few notches when, after destroying the Russian city of Kiev in 1240, the Mongols split into two armies. The larger force, commanded by Batu, or Subatai, headed towards Moravia and Hungary. The other wing swept south through Galicia and into Poland, where it easily beat a combined Polish and German army on April 9, 1241. 2 months later, the main Mongol army defeated the Magyar forces near Buda, across the river from Pest. Sounds like Budapest. The king of Hungary fled in the field for the territory of Dalmatia on the western side of Yugoslavia. All these places where Clinton had these wars and all these things, this is what was happening, Bosnia and all that. The Mongol detachment chased him tenaciously all the way to the shores of the Adriatic, sending shock waves through the Republic of Venice on the other side of the narrow sea. Another Mongol contingent raided deep into Austria. So the thing in the news these days is the Illuminati. You know, I think Obama and Bush and all these people in office right now, and Clinton and Kerry, they're all puppets of the Illuminati. Are they going to use the Chinese or the Russians to take out the people in the USA? I mean, if you Google this information, there's all kinds of warnings and videos on InfoWars with Alex Jones, and Russians showing up around Kansas by the thousands or maybe greater, and Hawaii, if you go look on the internet, supplies and Chinese troops, and Puerto Rico, there's YouTube videos. And again, I'm not saying this is all true. I'm saying that it's true that the information is on the internet. It's true that people are posting videos. It's true that there's press releases. That's true. Is it all propaganda, or is it all trying to scare us? And if that's the case, why, and what's that all about? Either way, it's not good for us, and we need to wake up. The Pope decided to send envoys to the great Khan, Genghis Khan. Look that up, Genghis Khan in photos or Genghis Khan in images. Just do a slideshow. It's fantastic. It's all free. Bearing 2 papal letters addressed to the Mongol leader. The weary travelers arrived at the Mongol court on July 1246. After 13 months of travel, just in time for the coronation of Guyuk Khan. A few days later, when they were escorted to the royal pavilion, as their escort looked at the friars' bare feet, so I guess the Pope sent some friars and they were barefooted, he warned the devout Franciscans that they had better cover their feet or risk losing them as punishment for appearing before the great Khan in such an insulting condition. There was really no hope for understanding between the Christian Pope and the Mongol Emperor. The great priest and the great Khan were each convinced of his own right to personal supremacy over the whole world. That's what I keep on trying to say. These crazy nuts are still out there. It makes you wonder if these guys are being reincarnated. You know, it's Lucifer or Satan being reincarnated over and over again. The papal letters made no sense whatever to the Mongol leader. Okay. Who could do this contrary to the command of God? Though thou sayest that I should become a trembling Christian, worship God or be ascetic. So there was no hope of having any kind of relationship between the Mongols. Just like with China right now, with all, I guess Russia just sold today in the news a aircraft carrier to India, which is next door to China, which each of them are having their own personal battles and conflicts. They're building up something. That's why I'm doing these reviews. I have actually better things to do with my life, but this stuff seems concerning that I find so many people know nothing. This is page 340. I've been just jumping around here giving you brief paragraphs, and I think you get the gist of the story. 300 years of murder and mayhem. And these are the players. The Mongols, the Shiites, who believe that the inheritance from Muhammad's leadership should go through the families. Looks like kingdoms. Kings do that. Royalty. And then the Sunnis, who were part of the religion, said, no, we want to pick our own leader. So that battle's been going on since Muhammad. And then on this side of the fence over here around Europe, I'm in the U.S., but over there, was between the Catholic Church, which had the Pope that was supposed to be acting for Jesus Christ, and the Byzantines, who said they didn't need a Pope, and the people could be Christians and study and pray on their own. Poor people, citizens everywhere, have been suffering and dying and butchered and their guts spilled out and heads lopped off because of these crazy people. Advanced in September 1259, accompanied by Christian forces from Georgia, Armenia, and Antioch, that would be the south of and near Russia, Georgia. The first major objective was Aleppo. Although they paused to destroy cities along the way, they moved more slowly than usual because Hulagu decided to take with him a large siege train of wagons bearing the parts of 24 stone-throwing catapults. Those are the weapons of the day. What do they have today? With all these viruses they're creating in labs and other kinds of microwave mind control and sky spraying and cameras spying on everybody. Imagine with the weapons these people have today, and if they're sitting there in a big meeting smoking their cigars, fat old men, and decide that we need to get rid of a few billion people, they can do it. Belying 24 stone-throwing catapults. As they marched, there was plenty of time for the news of the invasion to reach the Egyptian court at Cairo, where it brought another change of leadership. The whole Muslim world was in grave danger, the annihilation. But the teenage ruler of Egypt spent his happiest hours at cockfights and harem parties. He knew nothing of war. Well, it sounds like the USA today. Everybody's at a football game and watching friggin' insane TV. Stupid, mindless TV. You see those cartoons that adults are watching? The next day, 200 Templars, page 350, except for Brother Leo, were lined up in ranks outside the castle. Bierbos demanded their answer, but before they could reply, their commander called out to them to remain true to their God and the Virgin, to choose death rather than abandon the faith to which they had pledged their lives. The Templar commander was pulled out of line, dragged in front of his men, stripped naked. An executioner began to slice his skin into strips. They were pulled from his body with pincers, like pliers, in response to the Sultan's orders to be skinned alive. The blood gushed from his raw, exposed flesh as screams tore from his mouth. Again, I only mention these things so that people get a grasp of the horrific nature that these people that can happen. Page 474, the end of the book. It is safe to state that nowhere in the memory of the Knights Templar kept alive with more zeal than in the worldwide order of the free and accepted Masons. Remember that picture I showed you? These are up everywhere now. You see why I'm reading the book? This is 1,000 to 1,300. Same people involved. They like living like fat cats, I guess, and we people are expensive to maintain. Useless food eaters, I suppose. The oldest and largest fraternity society in the world. Freemasonry is the only organization other than the Templars themselves to find its principal identity in the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. As revealed in London in 1717, remember they created the Illuminati in 1776. And revised during its earlier. Freemasonry has just 3 basic degrees, the highest of which makes a member a Master Mason. Today, having achieved that status, one can follow a number of paths, to which the most popular in the United States are the 2 appendant systems commonly referred to as the York Rite or the Scottish Rite. And of course, as we know, I've been saying all along, it's a filter for all the henchmen and politicians and banksters and leaders and all kinds of organizations that they put here in the USA. They have to find the bad people that they can control. Not anybody that has any mercy or any compassion or any morals or any ethics. You're excluded. The Freemasons also sponsor an organization for tens of thousands of young men between 13 and 21 years old, which memorializes the fallen Grand Master in the name of the Order of de Molloy. Stories recalling the condemnation of the temple officers and the burning of the last Grand Master are part of the de Molloy ceremonies. No Masonic body claims direct descent from the original Knights Templar. They usually claim instead to have originated in medieval guides of cathedrals and castle builders. With the creation of the Illuminati, they took over all those things. The persistence of the legend, however, and the frequent references to the crusading order and the Masonic rituals sent off into several years of separate research. Although not a Freemason, I became fascinated by the unfolding revelation of the Templar roots in Masonic ritual, particularly in regard to 2 Masonic symbols and terminology so ancient to their order and meanings have been lost to the Freemasons themselves. So that's enough. You can look up Knights Templars, you can look up KKK, Ku Klux Klans, you can look up Freemasons and Masonry and pictures and images and get these books. This is all alive and real. That's the point of this particular book review. I just wanted you to see that for 300 years, this mass wave and murder and mayhem, and does anybody believe that through 700 years the people running the show have been any smarter? Well, no. We've had the Russian Revolution where they killed 66 million people. We had World War I where they killed millions of people. We had World War II where they killed millions of people. The American North and South was a fabricated war. The breaking away from England was a big staged event. They still kind of controlled everything. It was all Masonic, wasn't it? So the Masonic Illuminati higher up wanted to separate England from the USA and for their own control purposes, and they did it. And this is just all throughout history. Over there in Vietnam War, where they took all the American young men, millions of them, during the whole course of the thing, and got them introduced into heroin and LSD and the festival parties over in Europe, where everybody was having free festivals and sex and dancing and rock and roll music. You know, I like that kind of stuff, but it was intentional plot on the schemers. And here in the USA with Janis Joplin and all those people, they were doing the same thing. Lennon, he even said, the Beatles singer, he was saying he knew what was going on. Michael Jackson in his last days knew what was going on. You can look this stuff up. And if you find out what's going on, you start to say it, you could wind up dead. So anyway, since 1776 and probably before, there is a new crusade towards the New World Order, just like we saw here for 300 years. And I'm sure between 1300 and 1700, if I do my homework, I'll find these Illuminati conspirators, controllers, were causing all kinds of other murder and mayhem. And if I go back to when Jesus was there 2,000 years ago, we know that Rome had conquered Jerusalem area. And so for 2,000 years, 3,000 years, this mayhem and murder has been going on. And a lot of people go, oh, so what, Rick? Party till it happens. That, to me, is an insanity. That's just... I'm not going to do it. I'm making the videos. And I'm not the only one. There's millions of people out there in the world waking up. That's what they call it. And the people who are not waking up, they're even making TV shows and movies now. They're calling them zombies. So you got the people who are awake, and I guess all the people who are awake get on a list. So when they do the revolution, there'll be a knock at those people's doors. They're trying to take away the guns. Everybody knows that. They're installing more cameras, more monitoring systems, building bigger computers, even called the Beast, and tracking everybody's internet use. Obama right now is signing a treaty with the Pacific areas, you know, Japan, China, all those countries, India, in secret. It's like NAFTA, North American Treaty, which was devastating to the USA economy. Well, in secret, he's signing a treaty with them, and it's going to give them rights, almost like they're, instead of the USA being a separate country, it's going to be one gigantic country. And with all the trillions that I was thinking that they say that we owe China, and China can't, you know, needs to spend that money, and all the people in the USA are losing their homes and their wealth, I suppose they could just send millions of Chinese people here with that money and buy up all the houses and move in. Won't even have to have a war. But I think they have seems to me they have a nefarious plan for the people. So it's just a little history, just to show you that we all know the old saying, history repeats itself. And this is 300 years, 8 crusades. Wave going this way, killing everybody, and wave coming back, killing everybody. 7 or 8 crusades. Then you got the Mongolians up there by northern China and Russia, eastern Russia, Mongolia, look on a map, rising to power and coming in and wiping out all of the Christians and the Arabs in that Genghis Khan effort to rule the world. And what we have right now is we have another effort to rule the world. These Freemasons are, not all Freemasons are bad people, but the higher up you go and you get in the know, you're part of it. The rest of the people in all the lodges, just think about this. You may not be evil intent, but I'm sure the lodges have a leader, and they get certain instructions and they complete certain activities. Nefarious or not, they don't know, but they do follow the instructions. So this is like a secret army throughout the United States. All these lodges in every town with all these people who go there on Wednesday, Thursday nights in secret, because it's all in secret and they lock the door. So you got a secret army. And even if this army is told what to do, they'll do it. They may not know why they're doing it. And they may be told they're doing it for the good of the people. I don't know. I'm just saying, I ask questions. So I'm making 25 videos, and this is number 24. And I hope I haven't sounded too silly. And pardon me for any slip-ups in my language, stuttering, bad words or anything. I'm just an amateur trying to get the word out on some things I see as concerning. God bless you, and wake up. I need you to wake up, because I want my world to stay the way it has been all my life. I don't want there to be a revolution. Rick Miracle reporting.